Hello, dear friend. Thank you for hanging out with a couple of multiples today. We are your hosts, Drew
and Garden System. We are a married couple that both have Dissociative Identity Disorder, or DID.
The reality of living with multiplicity is nothing like what you might see in the movies or on soap operas. This mental health condition often goes unnoticed, even by mental health professionals. Did you know that someone with DID spends an average of 6 to 12 years in the mental health system before receiving a correct diagnosis? This is because there is still a prevailing belief, even among clinicians, that DID is rare. The truth is that there are around 120 million people all over the world that meet the criteria according to the DSM-5.
We are glad that you are here to learn all about dissociative identity disorder. Whether you are someone living with multiplicity, a supporter, or a mental health professional, you are making a difference by choosing to listen to this podcast today. You can help dispel myths about DID and help spread awareness by sharing this podcast with a friend or loved one.
Please visit acoupleofmultiples.com and sign up for our mailing list to learn all about our private paid community called Hearts Multiplied on the Circle platform. If you're enjoying this podcast, please consider giving us a 5-star review. And for our Apple listeners, we would really appreciate you leaving us a written review.
Together, we can make a difference by taking the disorder out of dissociative identities. We are honored to have a Gold Plus sponsor for Season 2.
The Institute for Creative Mindfulness is one of the largest EMDR therapy training programs in North America, founded and directed by Dr. Jamie Pless-Marich, author of Dissociation Made Simple. Dr. Jamie is the only EMDR therapy trainer who is out as a plural, and since 2015, she's offered the full EMDR therapy basic training in a way that honors lived experience and destigmatizes dissociation in clinical work.
We have never felt more accepted and validated as a multiple than when we were able to show up authentically as Garden System for our basic EMDR training. Having lived experience is valued and respected in these training courses.
Go to www.instituteforcreativemindfulness.com for a full list of upcoming trainings, both online and in person, offered by Dr. Jamie and her selected network of EMDR trainers.
Are you interested in becoming a sponsor? Please send an email to admin@acoupleofmultiples.com to request more information.
Welcome, dear friends, to this harmonious 8th episode in Season 2, where we share how we created internal cooperation through system management. We are your hosts, Drew
and Garden System,
a couple of multiples.
The reality of dissociative identity disorder.
As we each share our unique perspectives about internal cooperation and system management, we want you to know, dear listener, that we understand that every system is different, and you will come up with your own amazing ways to cooperate with each other internally that works for you. Our perspectives are just 2, and we'd like to share our stories and ideas to shed some light and hope on this subject that is oh so extremely important to live your best life with a harmoniously happy existence as a system.
Yes, we are all different and will do things differently from each other, and that's okay. What works for us may not work for you, and again, that's okay. We do strongly believe the key to breaking free from some of the more difficult challenges is finding that internal peace, cooperation, and compassion. That's what made everything change for ourselves. Not that we never struggle anymore, we totally do, but it's just so much easier, and note that I didn't say easy, just easier, now that we have bonded internally and worked together for the good of all of us. It's not just me, it's about we.
Aw, I like that. It's not just me, it's we. Couldn't be more true. It helps to acknowledge daily that we have a whole family of selves inside that matter and need and want to be heard, just like every person in the world. Some of the way we exist and do things as a system now is because we learned the hard way. The way things were in the past did not add up to team. And if I'm not mindful, sometimes they still don't. For us, it's a daily reminder for myself to work together and hear each other. Do you find yourself having to remind yourselves of this team thing too, Garden System?
Absolutely. In fact, we just had a little internal conversation about the whole we have to share this body together. The biggest struggle is when ourselves not only want different things, but opposite things. While we do our best to accommodate all of ourselves as best as we can, some of us have had to let go of some of our own wants or ideas to make room for other selves to have what they really need. Ultimately, the decisions we make come down to what is best for all of us. Within all of us, we view each self as having equal importance to all of the selves. We also have a system leader, but again, that doesn't make her more important than anyone else. She usually sacrifices the most for the rest of us and ensures the balance of equality between everyone as well. How does it work for all of you, Drew?
Well, first of all, I must say that I, Lizzie, really appreciate the acknowledgement that the quote leader, if you have one, does make a lot of sacrifices for the group to ensure the balance and equality between everyone. I'll be the first to admit, as the leader, I haven't always seen my role as that, like that of a coordinator. Over the years, I've struggled a lot with taking everything on and not delegating, which has led to an enormous amount of anxiety, stress, burnout, and feeling like I'm sacrificing a lot. But you bring up a lot of things here that are super important, and I want to talk about all of them. Like when selves want different or even opposite or opposing things, and how to best accommodate all of ourselves. And yes, letting go of some of our own wants or ideas to make room for other selves so that they can have what they really need. But before we get into all of that, you brought up the idea of bonding with ourselves, Garden System, which in my humble opinion needs to come first.
That was what we really had to do first. Although we already had a leader in our system, our leader sort of naturally fell into that position because she is a fictive. And in the fictive world, she was totally a type of world leader. And the other adult fictives were from the same world. So it was just the order of things for our system.
Whoa. Okay. So you've mentioned your fictives and this fictive world multiple times here on A Couple of Multiples, but you have yet to reveal much of where that all came from or how this happens, this fictive stuff. I realize it's a bit of a tangent. However, curious minds inquire, and I think our intrigued listeners deserve more. Wink.
Well, inquiring minds need to know that our fictive world and fictive selves come from the book series. And even though Amazon attempted to create a TV series, the TV series is absolutely nothing like the books. So please, buy the books, don't watch the TV show. Our fictives come from the Wheel of Time series, originally written by Robert Jordan, but the last few in the series were done by Brandon Sanderson after Robert Jordan passed away. The first book is called The Eye of the World. In this world, there are a group of people called Aes Sedai. They have the ability to channel the one power, which is kind of like magic. This ability also allows them to live extraordinarily long lives as well. These Aes Sedai are like a world political power. The kings and queens of the nations in this world often have an Aes Sedai as an advisor. The Aes Sedai have their own island and hierarchy in the world, and the leader of the Aes Sedai is known as the Amyrlin Seat. Now, our fictives are not canon. You're not going to read about Lyanna or Kilara or Sadie, some of our adult selves in our system, in the books. They come from fan fiction that we wrote ourselves when we were part of a community known as the Grey Tower. Now, in the books, the Aes Sedai live in the White Tower, but in this old online community, we go a little off script, and we had created a Grey Tower that the Aes Sedai in our fan fiction world live in. Lyanna became the Amyrlin Seat of the Grey Tower in this community years ago. Kilara and Sadie are also Aes Sedai, but they defer to Lyanna because, well, she's the Amyrlin Seat.
So this goes along nicely with some of what we're covering in this episode, because this has a lot to do with leadership in your system.
Right. Leanna, our leader, really emphasized the bonding in our system. In the beginning of understanding our diagnosis, Leanna felt she needed to still be at this gray tower, which now exists in our internal world. So she needed the rest of us to get along so she could do her job at the gray tower. Kind of like the internal world was more important work and we were bothering her with all the external conflict.
I see. So Leanna wanted others to do external daily life stuff while she managed the internal world in life.
Essentially, yes. So we had to start sorting out our differences and resolving our internal conflicts. We had to start finding ways to build trust with each other. The biggest gap in trust was between our adult parts and our littles. Our littles didn't trust our adult parts to keep us safe, to be fair, or to meet their needs. Our adults, that is all except Leanna, didn't trust the littles and had rather condescending views about the littles. Leanna, like her role in the world she came from, was a mediator between the rest of the adults and the littles. She recognized the value and wisdom that littles inherently hold and helped the other adults to see that value too. You bring up some really great points here.
And thank you for finally explaining in detail, might I add, how a fictive world and selves came into existence for you, and how leadership for you was kind of built into your system already because of the roles the characters had in the books and fan fiction you read and wrote. When talking about bonding with yourselves, I want to focus a minute on when you said that your littles didn't trust your adult parts to keep you safe or to be fair or to meet their needs. And I'm thinking to myself, well, no kidding. Seems like a common experience for people with dissociative disorders is to not have experienced adults in real life growing up who kept them safe or were fair or meet their needs. So it makes complete sense that littles wouldn't naturally trust adult parts or other selves in general to keep them safe or be fair or meet their needs.
Exactly. For us, our littles hold all of our trauma, while our adult selves believed we had a great childhood and such. So our adults would carry on social activities and work activities without reservations, but our littles would see danger lurking in every interaction and every task. Daisy in particular didn't believe that the adult selves were properly afraid enough in order to be cognizant of potential dangers. And in turn, our adult parts, not seeing a reason for fear, were often dismissive of the fears that the littles held. So there was a huge lack of respect for each other initially.
So we know that when adults in real life do things that their child finds scary, the child does not end up trusting them, therefore destroying the bond and proper attachment. Let this reality inform how systems go about daily life, since our goal is to build bonds and form secure attachments. As a parent or a teacher, when a child shows fear, what's a common one? A monster under the bed? Well, an idea would be to show the child that there is no danger under the bed so that they're able to sleep. So we take out a flashlight and shine it under the bed, and we get on our hands and knees and we look with the child. We get out our magical monster be gone spray and we spray until the child feels safe enough to sleep. I think about my own system. What are some things that my littles have shown fear about, that my adults may have just done without addressing their fears, therefore breaking trust? Something that my littles found dangerous was taking walks around the neighborhood or going to stores by ourselves. Their fear was that the neighborhood was full of people ready to attack us, and the same with stores. Certainly, someone would follow us or try to steal our purse or get in our car. All these fears had to do with past places we have lived where it wasn't safe, and we haven't always been in a position in our life to live in a safer neighborhood or city like we do now. So we came up with safety plans for the different situations that the littles were afraid of. When we walked with somewhere or went to the store and someone wasn't available to go with us, we carried an alarm or mace. We practiced some defense techniques. Developing safety plans helped my littles feel safe and started to build trust and a bond between them and my adult selves.
Taking these fears seriously was the first step in building trust between our littles and our adult selves. It wasn't really easy, as it felt like we had to do all these unnecessary extra steps. But we had to see that those steps were necessary. For example, one of our littles had issues sleeping anywhere but in her own bed at home. It was super frustrating when she would take over the body and do things like sleep on the floor, especially now that the body is older. I mean, sleeping on the floor is not comfortable by any means. The conversations in her head often started off with ridicule. "Are you kidding me? We can't sleep in the bed? What's wrong with you? This is stupid. This is ridiculous." That sort of internal talk is detrimental to the trust and relationship building we need to achieve. We finally figured out why this was such a big deal, and the next time it occurred, the internal talking was more compassionate. "I know you're scared. It makes sense you want to sleep on the floor. We're big now, and we can protect ourselves. What do you need in order to sleep in this bed instead of on the floor?" Changing our conversation to compassion and solution seeking instead of condemning and ridiculing changed how our littles viewed our adult selves.
I think it's easier to talk to ourselves in a mean or uncompassionate way since, unless we pause to think about it, it does not feel like we're talking to another person. It feels more like we're talking to that pesky internal voice in our head, like it's just a thought we're hearing. When in reality, these selves have feelings and thoughts and memories all their own. Validating fears and being compassionate and kind, just as if talking with an outside the body person, yes, we begin to earn trust from ourselves within ourself, which eventually makes challenging situations that come up a lot easier. Trust is everything. Garden system, you brought up that everyone except Leanna didn't trust the littles and didn't recognize the value and wisdom that littles inherently hold. Would you talk about why yourselves didn't particularly trust your littles?
They really viewed the littles as a nuisance in the beginning of our healing journey and recovery. Our gatekeeper is a little, and the littles have a lot of power and ability to take control of the body, more so than our adult selves do. So the adults often feared that the littles would take over and do something that we would regret doing, or that would embarrass the adults in the system, or just make life difficult in general. Kilara often would get frustrated by the littles just suddenly taking over, and she wanted to wrestle that power away from them. She, and honestly Victoria too, wanted to just demand power over the littles. Leanna wouldn't allow it though, which caused conflict between Leanna and Kilara. So again, the littles were viewed as the cause of a great deal of grief and drama.
I can relate. For my system, the things that the littles wanted to spend time doing, like playing, were seen as a waste of time to some of our bigs, including me, Lizzie. Not that we don't value play or see it as important. I know all about child and human development as a teacher. However, as an adult with a grown body and a lot of responsibilities, playing takes time, valuable time that we could be using to do all the adult things we need to do on our to-do lists.
OMG, yes. It is so frustrating sometimes for the adults to have to make time for playing and games and stuff for the littles. It's hard enough finding enough time to be an adult, and it requires so much extra time juggling when you have DID.
And we figured out real quickly what the consequences were for not letting the littles come out and play on a regular basis.
Temper tantrums.
Yes. Fall to the floor, kicking and screaming, crying and fussing internally. And let's face it, sometimes externally. Literally taking over the body and having a complete meltdown. And once a child, part or not, gets to the meltdown point, it takes a while to get them regulated again. So, take a page out of our book, or in this case, this voice message from our show. Time spent doing little kid type of things is not a waste of time. It ends up being a time saver. A happy, well listened to, and attended to child is one that will trust their adults because they know they're valued, cared for, and loved. And get this, will be more willing to be content when yous need to do adult things because they had their time and will have their time again.
Yes, it is this sharing of time that helps everything run much more smoothly. The littles have to have their time to play Minecraft, watch that Disney movie, or color. When they have their time, then they are much more willing to allow the adults their time, so they don't interrupt the workday, or when Victoria wants to do the household chores. If they've gotten to watch their favorite show, then they don't mind when the adults want to watch theirs. Littles are pretty good at understanding the concept of taking turns, but by golly, don't forget to give them their turn. What's another way you helped build trust between your littles and adults?
Well, I actually thought of something. Early on, it was important for the littles to understand physical boundaries between adults and children because that was not modeled well in actual childhood. We spent and still spend time giving hugs to our littles, visualizing that inside, holding them in an appropriate and loving way, and building trust that physical touch does not need to mean physical violation. This has been and still is important and helps in our relationship with Garden System, a relationship with an outside person. It helps the littles feel like there can be trust with adults in general outside of us and allows for the adults to have a relationship with another adult while knowing that Garden System will respect the boundaries of my littles when they're out and allow for our adults to have an intimate relationship without fear constantly from the littles. Well, mind you, there's a lot of reassurance that needs to consistently happen because it's not like the littles forget that they were once treated inappropriately, but it does pave the way for the new knowledge that it is possible for adults to maintain appropriate boundaries with internal work we did within our system first. Obviously, this is a big topic that can and will be discussed in greater detail in a future episode. I know Garden System and I have talked about having season 3 be about relationships and DID. Okay, back on topic here. Garden System, what's something else that helped your littles and adults bond or build trust?
Well, doing certain things internally with each other does help transfer the skills to external things. It's that really tough fact that we have to reparent ourselves after trauma. Another thing we did, at the suggestion of our therapist, was to pair up each little with an adult self that they trusted. The littles chose an adult that they would be with or go to as needed. For example, Jenny wasn't too fond of Keelara at first, but she trusted Leanna because Leanna respected the littles. Later, when Sadie came on the scene, Jenny really came to trust her. And this was the beginning of bringing parts closer together through what I like to call trust by proxy. Jenny didn't trust Keelara, but she trusted Leanna, who had trust for Keelara. So Jenny could have just enough trust for Keelara because of her relationship with Leanna. Hopefully you all were able to follow that.
Trust by proxy. I like that. I mean, if you think about it, we do this with outside relationships. If we have a friend that knows someone and thinks they're a decent person, we have a little trust for the new person we don't know automatically. Trust by proxy. We also have paired up some of our littles with bigs to kind of watch over them like a parent would their child. I, Lizzie, take care of our little Ramona. Feeny watches over Ashley, and so on.
But there is more system bonding that has to occur to achieve internal cooperation. It isn't just littles against bigs, and bigs is how our littles refer to adult parts. It's also between the individual selves, between two littles, or between two adults, or anyone in the middle, or non-human, or whatever. Adult selves often have beef with each other, too.
Right. And the beef is often from a lack of trust or appropriate bonding. Sometimes it helps for ourselves to be curious about our other selves, asking your others questions about themselves, getting to know them. Asking what they like and dislike can help form understanding and ultimately trust. The example I have talked about in a past episode and also during our last interview, the one where we interviewed Annie Goldsmith about eating disorders and DID, is when I, Lizzie, was completely annoyed by one of my other selves, who goes by her chosen name now, Journey. I used to call her Karen because of the level of annoyed I was with her. but it wasn't until I started talking to her and listening to her talk to our therapist during therapy sessions that I started to understand the reasons behind some of her annoying behaviors. That's when I started having compassion for her, which led to us forming a bond and trust. So much so that we took down the wall that used to separate our two rooms in our internal house that we visualize in our internal world. I'll make sure to tell you more in greater detail, dear listener, in our next episode, because we are going to go into depth about internal conflict resolution. All that to say, one of the ways that we have fostered trust and bonding between our other selves, not just between littles and bigs, is to ask questions and to practice tuning into or watching or listening when others are out in the body, also known as being co-conscious. We started practicing this during therapy sessions with our therapist, inviting our others to listen while one of ourselves was out talking to our therapist. Developing awareness and connection with our others involves getting to know them as much as possible and gathering information however we can. And there are lots of ways to do that.
Internal communication definitely leads to developing awareness, building connections internally, and developing trust. Another important piece that we have had to learn is to withhold sharp judgments and criticisms of other parts. Leanna often struggled with harsh judgments of Kilera within ourselves. This is partly due to the fact that Leanna is Kilera's mother within our fictive world, and Leanna often held harsh criticism for Kilera with the belief that it was what Kilera needed. That little tidbit is also why Kilera defers to Leanna's leadership. Leanna had to learn that her sharp criticisms of Kilera's behaviors and emotions actually fueled the negative behaviors she didn't like.
Oh, gee. This makes a curious mind wonder if this resembled your relationship with your own mother. Like maybe you were drawn to internalizing this type of relationship.
Oh, absolutely. Leanna, being the Amerlin seat, has her face that she shows the world and has this expectation for others to fall in line with the picture-perfect family. Certain behaviors are acceptable while others are most certainly not. And Kilera was always the rebel. This is also how we dealt with our own religious upbringing. Leanna really embodied a proper way of being with a strong sense of morality. She's not religious by any means, though, by the standards of the world we all live in. Within the realm of the Wheel of Time world, she fights for the light or goodness, and Kilera identifies as fighting for the light as well, but she likes to let loose a lot more than Leanna. I mean, ironically, Leanna has the same tendencies as Kilera, but that's more of her little secret, whereas Kilera doesn't care what anyone else thinks.
And this, my friends, I think explains a lot of the reasons fictives and inner worlds based on fictives is a common thing. Stories, books, and movies are consuming and very inviting to get lost in when one is experiencing repetitive trauma in childhood. As you can see from Garden System's explanation, all of it is intricate and detailed and easy to get wrapped up in, and a person naturally will gravitate towards characters and stories that are personally relatable to them, as Garden System just described.
Yeah, I was writing my story about myself without even knowing it. Talk about dissociation.
Right, from the fan fiction you were a part of. Lizzie, me, a part of Drew, who we see as our host part or leader, is also a fictive based off of the TV show we used to watch during our childhood, Lizzie McGuire from the Disney Channel. For those of you who are not familiar with Lizzie McGuire, Lizzie was played by young Hilary Duff, and our character was a teenager trying to fit in at school. What also really caught my eye about this show was that Lizzie had cartoon thought bubbles that appeared above her head, which depicted an animated cartoon version of herself that would talk to her. Cartoon thought bubble Lizzie reminded me of the internal voices that I heard in my own head. I, too, was a young person desperately trying to fit in and be the, quote, normal, stereotypical singleton kid that I absolutely wasn't. Relating to and being like the Lizzie character from the TV show was my way of trying to mask what I didn't have words for at the time. I was losing time and needed a solution because I couldn't remember what was being taught in my classes. It is how I, Lizzie, ended up trying to stay out and be the only one out for long periods of time, holding on with a death grip so I could have one continuous strand of memory. It did work for a while. I got straight A's, I made some friends, but I couldn't keep up the mask into adulthood. My littles were having tantrums, having no time out. My other bigs felt like the only way they could have time out was by blocking me completely, causing me times of complete amnesia. Not fun. So, in terms of fixing this problem, I was forced to get to know my others, to take off the mask and allow my others to get to know me and understand that I really needed and want to know what's happening while they're out in the body. My others have had to grasp the understanding that my need for control over my life makes me feel safe. And in turn, I have had to understand what my others' needs and wants are, because this is their life and their body too that we share.
Sharing is really important. Recognizing that it's not just my life, but our life, and letting go of that desperate need for control is scary and necessary, at least in our opinion. Kealara would totally have been the control freak trying to do everything if it weren't for Leanna managing everyone and making sure everyone was heard and respected. Kealara often pushed back and argued with Leanna that she knew better than the others and that it was ridiculous to negotiate with a 4-year-old. But Leanna had the wisdom to know that there would be an internal coup if only one fronted all the time. Kealara now is in agreement that Leanna was right about all of it, but she still sometimes complains about it. She definitely has become a lot better at negotiating with the others and explaining what is really important to her while honoring what is also important for the others.
At the beginning of my therapy journey, after we finally figured out that we had DID, one of the first things my therapist and I tried to figure out, besides figuring out who all was a part of my system, was figuring out what job each of my parts had and asking myself if that job was still necessary now in present day, or if a particular self needed a new revised job considering everyday life now. And it was true. Some of my selves had jobs that were necessary during my childhood of trauma, but now were actually detrimental to my life as an adult, out and away from the trauma environment. The self that comes to mind first is Feeny. Feeny didn't show up in therapy with the name Feeny. That came later. She insisted on being called the Dark Phoenix, in all caps, the whole 9 yards. Her pronouns were to be capitalized in writing, no matter where they fell in a sentence. According to her, she earned her status and demanded respect. Long story short, many of my selves that claimed to be a part of the selves that were from the undead world, that was a place in my internal world described as being underground, were full of parts of myself that were kind of reenacting or representing the hierarchical system that existed in real life and the real people that were a part of it in my trauma past. Our job for a while was hearing these parts out, gathering information when they would let us close to it, and eventually finding them new jobs or roles that contributed to a functional daily life for us all.
Many of ourselves take on certain jobs or roles to keep the whole system functioning and to protect the rest of the system, even if that protection doesn't make sense to the rest of the system. With some types of trauma, jobs were given to those selves as opposed to the selves just developing to fulfill a particular role. Besides having a leader, what other types of roles or jobs did your selves originally have?
Well, without giving too many specific, possibly triggering details of their jobs, the main idea was that certain selves in the undead world were there to keep other parts in line. Other parts were there to do the stuff they were told to do by the real-life adults in the hierarchical system without question or emotional reaction. And yet others' sole job was to withstand what the real-life adults were doing without an emotional reaction or really any reaction at all. Of course, once these parts were brought up to speed about our life now, which took a whole heck of a lot of work, they now have completely different jobs that still use some of their strengths or characteristics. For instance, Feeny, who was a self that was to keep everyone in line, has now become a fierce protector. She watches everything and makes sure that if anyone were to try to mess with us, well, they'd have something coming to them. Outside of my group of selves that used to be part of the undead world, Our house parts that were there to go to school and do homework and carry on with our daily life activities when I was young, like Lizzie, Journey, and Ramona, have learned just how well protected they are now because of the new roles my cells have taken on that used to be part of the undead world. Instead of fearing them or being attacked by them, they're now protected by them. So Ramona, one of our littles, has less fear. Myself, Lizzie, can lean into a life of less anxiety, and so on.
When certain selves have roles that at first seem detrimental to the entire system, or even a bit scary, that can create a lot of discord. There can be a lot of fear, hate, and a desire to get rid of certain parts because of the roles that they have held in the past and are still trying to do in present day. There's a level of shame that goes along with having such parts. At least for us there is. Keeping the others in line is technically protective because it prevents being hurt by the outside people. How did you get Feeny to understand that the outside danger was gone and that she had no reason to continue keeping the selves in line, so to speak?
Oh, wow. That would require a long, detailed answer to really explain, because it was a gradual process over a long period of time. Maybe we could consider doing an episode very carefully and thoughtfully planned out about mind control and RA in the future, where I can give more details about the process. But honestly, I think it was the relationship with our therapist and her ability to question Feeny's thoughts and behaviors that eventually got Feeny to see that her actions were detrimental to us lowly humans. I think I forgot to mention that Feeny, doesn't see herself as human. She's a phoenix that rose from the ashes, just like the mythological creature. So our therapist respectfully showed her how she was hurting us now, not helping us, by, quote, keeping us in line, which eventually changed her mind and behavior. You see, she also had to come to the conclusion that she wasn't going to lose her status with our interject that was above her if she didn't do her, quote, job. So she basically had to test this out slowly over a long, long period of time. The journey had a lot of road bumps.
Well, we know for ourselves how difficult it was to build trust in a relationship with parts of ourselves that were technically hurting us, or that we just were completely appalled by due to that self's thoughts or behaviors. Could you share a little bit about the evolution of Feeny's relationships with your other selves and how that changed over time?
Well, again, I'm not going to go into complete detail because the subject could be an entire episode on its own, but Feeny's basic story is that she came up out of the undead world to the house where my everyday life parts live to attack them because we were in therapy with the new knowledge that we indeed had other selves. We basically triggered her out because we were talking in therapy, and talking wasn't allowed. She came to shut us all down. Attacks ensued. The house was burned down by another undead part at one point. Our therapist had to show no fear. She had to invite Feeny to be there in the room with her, to get her to give some information without her really realizing it, to validate how important and helpful and protective she was at the time of the trauma, to gain her trust bit by bit, and eventually to get Feeny to understand that she was lied to and deceived, all while keeping Feeny's dignity intact. It was no easy feat. Over the course of this work, Feeny teeter-tottered from attacking to protecting, and from attacking to protecting again, until she was sure that she actually did hold more status from protecting than attacking. All of us eventually were secure in the fact that Feeny was now in alliance with us, that she would not attack anymore, and that we could rely on her to protect us.
In the beginning of getting to know all selves, it can feel scary to trust a part like Feeny. I've heard many others with DID talk about wanting to get rid of parts. We ourselves have even tried locking up one of ourselves when we felt that part was doing more harm than good. We have learned through that experience that locking parts up resulted ultimately in more internal chaos. Maybe there are times when certain selves need to be contained for the safety of the system, but they can't stay locked up for good. What are your experiences with separating out a part and keeping them away from the rest of the system?
Well, we indeed did lock Feeny up at one point. and a little birdie atrium that we built in the center of our house to stay in when she was attacking us. Oh boy, was she ever angry. In our experience, it did not help. When we started seeing our current therapist, we went at it with a different tactic. Our therapist did a good job of identifying our strengths. We do have a whole angelic realm in our system. And instead of locking Feeny up in a cage, we had the angels hold her in light. Visualizing her being wrapped in light calmed and softened her instead of leaving her even more rageful. It introduced calming, enduring love into her experience. She was absolutely resistant to being essentially hugged by our angels, but in all honesty, she preferred it to being caged up.
That reminds us of the light stream visualization that we were taught for EMDR Phase 2. You basically envision this light overhead and it just sort of sweeps over you and in you and becomes radiant and brilliant to encompass any distress one might be feeling. It's a visualization exercise that we teach our own clients to do before starting the trauma reprocessing. What a beautiful way to deal with Feeny. Identifying the strengths of each self was another important way we established internal cooperation. And we can definitely dive into how we figured out and utilized everyone's strengths in our next episode.
I love that. Yes, how we figured out and utilized our selves' strengths. And we can talk about conflict resolution too. I can't wait. So, to recap this episode, we talked about how to create trust and bonds between ourselves and a system. We also talked about sharing time and space with ourselves. Garden System and I also gave personal examples of fictives, and we also discussed leadership and roles within our systems.
We covered a number of great topics today, and we have so much more to share. We can't wait to continue this great conversation next time.
Until then, thank you for hanging out with A Couple of Multiples.
We are honored to have a Gold Plus sponsor for Season 2.
The Institute for Creative Mindfulness is one of the largest EMDR therapy training programs in North America, founded and directed by Dr. Jamie Pless-Marich, author of Dissociation Made Simple. Dr. Jamie is the only EMDR therapy trainer who is out as a plural, and since 2015, she's offered the full EMDR therapy basic training in a way that honors lived experience and destigmatizes dissociation in clinical work.
We have never felt more accepted and validated as a multiple than when we were able to show up authentically as Garden System for our basic EMDR training. Having lived experience is valued and respected in these training courses.
Go to www.instituteforcreativemindfulness.com for a full list of upcoming trainings, both online and in person, offered by Dr. Jamie and her selected network of EMDR trainers. Thank you to our bronze sponsor, Alex Amar, LCSW, who offers weekly creative art classes, including the Creative Journal, Soul Collage, and Altered Books, all on the Zoom platform exclusively for people living with dissociation.
For more information, check out her website at alexamar.com, spelled ALIXAMAR.com, or her Facebook page, Dissociative Creative Explorations. Are you interested in becoming a sponsor? Please send an email to admin@acoupleofmultiples.com to request more information.
From your host, Drew
and Garden System,
thank you for listening to A Couple of Multiples, the reality of dissociative identity disorder. This podcast is intended for educational purposes and is not a replacement for therapy.
Listening to this podcast does not constitute a therapeutic relationship with the hosts or any guest speakers.
If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review. We would love to hear what you enjoyed the most.
You can visit our website at acoupleofmultiples.com for additional information, including how to join our new online paid community called Hearts Multiplied, to access additional resources, and to also subscribe to our mailing list to receive future updates.
Remember, you matter and are loved for being all of yous.